Morning, everybody on my West Coast side. Good afternoon now to the folks on the East Coast. I hope you enjoyed the last session with SVT with James and AK. So I want to thank everybody for joining this session at Cartonize. In a minute, I'm going to introduce Joe Henderson, who is the Senior Director of Technology Alliances at Deposco. But before we begin, just going to kind of go over just some general housekeeping. So again, the session will be recorded and available on demand for viewing after we wrap up today. You'll receive a recording via email within 24 hours. Please submit some questions in the Ask the Question box. We'll get to as many as we can. If we don't get to them, we will definitely send you an email with the answers. There's also some reaction buttons on there, so you can engage with Joe. And if you'd like to talk to the presenter, there's a book a demo option as well. Moving to the next session, which we'll go right to after that, we've heard a couple things about some little glitch as far as if it were not seamless. So simply just refresh your screen if that's the case. With that, with further ado, let's get started. Joe, take it away. All yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. So just diving right in, as you saw, we're going to talk about order management today, how that fills in the e-commerce gap around processing the orders as they come to the system, but always good to understand kind of a little bit of where I came from. I can do this exhaustively, but I want to go through very quickly. I spent about 15 years in operations, both as a continuous improvement person, as well as in building out network optimization, and then moving over to the software side where I was a principal SME for LlamaSoft. I then ended up in alliances, which allowed me to work with Pacurate in how we serve Deposco's customers for both software as well as hardware solutions around our environment. And so I find myself at the intersection of our customers' problems, how we use technology to serve it. And that's really the journey I want to take you through together today, starting a little bit with where the market is and where the market's gone over the last 10 years as e-commerce has become a critical part of how these businesses are run. And you see this either on the brand side of how they need to interact with their customers, as well as on the shipper side for how are the various ways it has to both be received as well as fulfilled to get that demand addressed within the market. And we've seen just explosive growth in this sector outside of that of the total market itself. On average, e-com has grown about 13% combined average growth rate for the last 10 years compared to 3% for the market broadly. So this has led for it becoming from a 6% share of total market to 21% of total market. And we continue to see this pie adjust as more and more business is done online, both as a primary sales channel as well as an extension of the traditional brick and mortar retail. And what that's led to is over the last 10 years, we went from about 15% of all brands were exclusively online to now roughly 1 in 3, 30% are exclusively online. So there's this enormous market that needs to be served that isn't going through traditional foot traffic. But in the same vein, we've seen customers really embrace this, really reach and really take this on and say that 70% back in 2014 would start the shopping journey online. Now roughly 90% of shopping journeys start online, from research to discovery to ultimately selection. And what we've seen is going from about 25% of purchases being done online to now almost half of purchases are done online. So the journey starts there and tends to finish there more often than it ever did. And at the same time, when brands have been surveyed on how you feel about this, we've seen that net promoter score go from 50 to 70 over that 10 years. So there's more of it happening, more of it finishing there. And in general, the customers are really happy about it. That's the upside to this. Now let's start talking about the cautions that need to be put in place. We see that customers are becoming more fickle. It could be the ease of access. It could be the number of options. It could be slimming differentiation from one brand to the next. But what we know from surveys is that if you mess up the first order with a customer, there's a 32% chance that they're never coming back. And if you make a second mistake, it rises to almost 80% where they will not come back to the brand. And what we see then is in post-purchase, if you have a bad customer experience, a bad customer support-led experience, those customers are roughly 4 times as likely to leave the brand and not come back. And when they do, they're going to go find 9 to 15 of their friends to tell about their bad experience. So you're not just going to lose that customer. Oftentimes, you're going to lose customers you never had in the first place. All of that to say that 83% of customers when surveyed felt that the post-purchase experience had to be improved. This goes for how they're communicated with, how quickly they're shipped to, that entire post-purchase experience of how you inform and execute upon that customer demand, which leads us to the way Gartner now wants us to look at it, which is that the role of customer fulfillment function is changing. It's causing a shift in focus from cost savings to value creation for customers. And that's not just marketing speech. We really want to think about this in the line of the shippers themselves, because we can't just say, do everything. We don't have infinite money to throw at the problem. You don't have infinite margins that you can burn to satisfy those customers. You have to find that awkward balance between high expectations, high execution, and a high feeling of how their brand experience is gone, as well as how do you support that operationally? Do you serve from a single DC? Do you work with 3PLs? Do you bring in drop shippers? And we're going to talk about some of those configurations here in a bit, but you have to make conscious decisions about how the structure of your network is made to be able to fulfill that. And then what rules and policies and checks are you going to put in place so that you don't see things like breaking a 5-unit order up into 5 boxes or shipping from multiple locations when maybe a little bit of caution would allow it to be combined. This is the challenge that shippers are finding themselves in when they're serving the market. So looking at how the customer views the journey, and it's important to think about this as a break between how your customer experiences you and how you, from a structural standpoint, address that. We're seeing more differentiation than ever before. Some of it is traditional brick and mortar. They could walk into a retail store and place that e-commerce order. They can work through Amazon and have that order directly sent to you. They can work through their Shopify, through another website. They can actually work directly with OEM vendors sometimes. There's all of these different ways where that demand can be captured and injected into the network. And you want to be able to provide systemic functions behind that to enable it, from processing the inventory and making it available to promise to how that order is moving through the network. And that's what we're going to talk about with order management features. And then ultimately, how is that getting fulfilled to the customer? Through all of this complexity, it's important to remember that the customer really only cares about these actions. It's really easy for them to put the order in. After that, it's forgotten. What they care about is notifications and execution. Are you telling them when it went out the door, how it went out the door, which carrier it went with, where was the handoff? Do they have a nice portal where they can see that it's being tracked and then ultimately see that acknowledgement that it was delivered? They care about execution and the timeliness of that execution. Everything else is going to be your problem on the shipper side. So that leads us to, how can this be configured? If we think about everything coming in and everything going out, this has become more complex probably than it ever was. If you think about how you maybe traditionally did this 20 years ago, I can tell you my experience. I would just walk into a store, I'd look for something. If it wasn't there, I'd walk out. And generally, I wouldn't have a bad experience because I'd just say that's what it was. Today's consumers don't see it that way. They really want to come at you from whatever angle they are thinking of. They could come online through Amazon. They could come online through Etsy or another website. And then ultimately, you look at what it is, and it's not even owned inventory. It's not sitting in your DC. It's not sitting in your retail store. You actually are going to route that order over to your third-party logistics partner to get that served. But similarly, we're seeing an increase in people actually going into the retail environment and making purchases on the spot that they can't walk away with. That is because the person on the floor says, it's in the warehouse. We can bring it to the store. We can bring it to this, or we can ship it directly from our DC. Or in some situations, maybe that's a limited time product that has to sit at the vendor. You're going to go out and reach out to the original equipment manufacturer and get that drop ship. All of these different configurations are possible. And without complex order management policies, this really becomes unmanageable. Most traditional manual or pick processes are really designed for maybe one point of entry, one point of exit, maybe limited geo breakups such as a West Coast or an East Coast DC. But we know that to be able to control margins right now, you need to be able to consider all of the facets of that order before it drops into the warehouse. Because after it drops in the warehouse, it's really how am I going to process it, not have I made the right financial decision, both from an SLA standpoint as well as from a margin protection standpoint to facilitate that order. So let's look at 3 features that we consider crucial to modern distributed order management and why they need to be deployed. We've used traditional ones, I said, maybe an east-west differentiation, or maybe you had a hard break between this is the online, this is the retail footprint, but that's not really sufficient right now to deal with customers for where they're coming in. So I need to be able to allocate inventory, but not necessarily hard gate it. I could make all of my available to promise by facility available and then carve off a portion of that and say, no matter where the inventory is at, maybe I always show 50% of it to Shopify, or I always show a hard number to Shopify. Or because Shopify is such an important channel to me, I might guard that inventory and say, there's a hard ceiling, and if it ever drops below that, the rest of my channel can't see that inventory, but I'm going to continue to publish that inventory to Shopify. Similarly, I can break that up unevenly. Instead of saying that I have 100 units, maybe I allow for 60% of it to be seen by any channel at any time, so that I always have that safety buffer, so that there isn't this channel conflict where one can bleed the entire channel dry, whereas others are not available. And then I want to be able to blend true available to promise. When we think of available to promise in traditional warehouse sense, we're going to think of the combination of what is going to hit my warehouse within the SLA period, what unallocated inventory I have today, and what is not already going out the door. But that's going to be owned inventory. Modern ATP has to consider owned inventory in an unallocated status as well as accessible inventory, because I might have some fulfillment in my Amazon. I could have some 3PL. I could also have that vendor dropship. And I want to be able to synchronize that so that when I present total sellable inventory to my customer, it's accurate and within lines of the SLA expectations and a true available promise. And then I want to look at syncing that with the other systems. Joe, you just spent a lot of time talking about inventory. True, but that's the how do we calculate inventory? How do we access inventory? I want to think about this from a technological standpoint, which is how do I publish that inventory out to the various channels? And then do I have that automated? If you think about the way that traditional POS inventory is calculated, a lot of times that would be end of day synchronization, or possibly it could be a push that's done asynchronously. But there's always that chance that what you've shown the customer in the store does not reflect what is truly available anymore. So I need to be able to get these as close to real time, or at least as close to the heartbeat for that channel as I can. That way, when my DC publishes inventory, it goes out to Shopify, it goes to Amazon, it goes to my other marketplaces, and I reflect that as accurately as possible. But the key, though, is cross-channel. I want to see that when I sell on Amazon, I deplete the amount that's available to Shopify. I deplete the amount that's in the back room in the store based on my allocation policies, and then backwards that back to the channel so that they have an updated available to promise. Because you can have all of these different methods of selling firing at the same time, ensuring that those transactions are horizontally visible to each other and then convey what the end result is, which is your new available to promise. This keeps all of your channels in sync so that you don't deliver the poor customer experience of a back order or an out of stock, which is going to lead to that leaving your brand rates that we talked about earlier. And then finally, the biggest one for us in the modern day is understanding that the order management process happens before the warehouse, before the distribution process. And that's because you want to look at that order as it comes in and apply logic and rules in a consistent, repeatable fashion. So if I see that an order comes in with, say, an oversized package or one that requires white glove treatment, maybe I'm only routing that to a single facility, or I'm even routing that directly to the vendor. I need to break that entire order off, or I need to be able to break order lines of that off and get them over to that in a predictable way. Similarly, if I have a policy that says I don't want to break up orders, I don't want to ship from multiple facilities, I want that to go ahead and drop into that facility, get processed as a single order, maybe have limited rules around order consolidation that says it's okay to hold that order for 12 or 24 hours to allow for the product to be combined, because I know that ultimately I can hit the SLA for my customer while maintaining the margin on that order itself. So this is really important for consistent and predictable execution on that customer's demands without stressing out the people on the floor. Think about how we would have run this in a paper facility compared to modern expectations, and it's nearly impossible. There needs to be this differentiation between the fulfillment and the inventory process and how those orders come in and how that logic is layered on before it ever hits the floor. So important part of this is we talked about the market. What are customers expecting? How has that expectation gone up? Then how are we addressing this from a system standpoint? It's really important to think about what the value has been delivered to customers. So when we look at this around Altitude Sports, they were founded in 1984 with some of their first retail stores. And then as they've gone on this journey, there was this need to accelerate the online and the back of house processing and be able to make them truly able to do fulfillment in the way that it was expected. So we came in and took a paper process in their DCs, and we've helped them grow for the last 8 years. And one of the things we've seen is a 20% reduction in how much time goes into that actual pick wave. A 30% increase in the productivity that's experienced on the floor. How much time does it take to get from the pick to the pack station and then out the door? Being able to address this from a rules-based processing perspective, as well as increasing the amount of information that the people on the floor receive, this makes it so that there is a nice, clean, consistent process that they can expect how it is going to go out the door and what that's going to look like when it happens. When COVID hit, they were one of the first being able to offer a 2-hour delivery promise so that when those e-orders came in, the retail store would be able to fulfill them and their customers would still be able to go out and do their outdoors activities in the ways in which they had before the lockdown. And then many of you are probably familiar with Psycho Bunny. We've been on a multi-year journey with them as well. Order management plays an enormous part in their business. They started out as an e-brand in Montreal, and now they have a network of over 100 retail stores. And we helped them stand that up from a back of house fulfillment perspective over the last 3 years. So it's been really critical to say, not just what can my customers see online, what can my customers see online, put into a cart, and then ship from the back of the house. This changes it from a few centralized e-commerce or direct-to-consumer focused DCs to an expansive network where every back of house of store that's been enabled can be treated like a micro fulfillment center. This allowed them to take a full day off of their SLAs to be able to increase their visibility to the online platform for roughly 60% of their network in the first year. And this means that all of their inventory is in a sellable status, regardless of if you walk in and pick it up and put it in the cart, versus if you shop online, if you interact with them in that manner, to be able to get it through the e-commerce side. And this is a journey that they continue to go on, and we're going to see more and more improvements as this enablement of omni-channel within their network helps to continue to fulfill their customers' needs. So all of that combined, what are the customers expecting? Well, how's the technology serve it? And ultimately, what have we seen realized from other customers? As we've seen studies out in the network around order management, we know that the deployment of order management leads to about a 10-point increase in customer satisfaction. This leads to higher sales, higher retention. And what that ultimately means is that most companies experience between a 4 and 10% increase in sales. Now, this could be driven through better customer experience, better customer retention. Some of it is the improved available promise we talked about earlier. If you see something and you confidently believe that you can put it in your cart, that you are able to use that for checkout, this is going to increase that return, and that's going to justify this rules-based approach to order management within the system. And then that promise, we talked on that earlier slide around what is the only thing your customer cares about. Being able to promise that consistently in a reliable way, that means that they believe that they're going to get it. And now 20% of the time, they are getting it within the window that you've promised. And that leads to that increased confidence that affects both of those other metrics. So when you think about this, it's not just how am I managing the order, it really is how am I managing the end-to-end customer experience, customer interaction with the brand, from putting it into the cart to receiving it. And that ultimately means that they're more likely to be sticky, leading to higher lifetime value of those customers. So there's 3 things that I want to walk away from this with. I want things that you can easily digest and some nice quick fortune cookies to take away from this. First one is going to be very, very easy. E-commerce has grown. E-commerce continues to grow, and we've seen that this growth rate is not abating, and so we see this eventually becoming parity with the retail experience. But what that means, though, is that customers expect more. The Amazon effect is real, as much as we don't like to keep talking about it. That push for 2-day mail, that push for 3-day mail, whichever the flavor is that your customer wants, they have a high expectation of you making that commitment, of being able to deliver on that commitment, and then being able to do it every single time. Otherwise, they're going to hop to the next one, which means that order management needs to be brought in to manage this process. Paper is not going to do it above the small business space, above a single DC. As your complexity of interaction grows and your complexity of fulfillment methods grows, that means that the ability to apply rules-based processing has been more important now than ever for safeguarding that experience, which ultimately is around safeguarding your margins as a brand or a shipper on the outbound side. And so that delivery of a consistent customer experience has to be foundationed by a technological solution that actually enables it. Meaning that you need to get started on it now if you haven't already. Exceptional service is now becoming the expected service level. And there are decisions being made not around your ability to provide the product, or at least your ability to present its availability on a website, but how consistently do you transform that demand into a realized order along the SLAs that you've agreed to. So if you aren't deploying order management either in a single facility or in a multi-facility network, it's time to look at adding that rules-based processing to enhance what your customer receives in brand value. Thank you.
All right, Joe, thank you very much. I mean, what's amazing from this, like, it's still so incredible to see how much change, right, has happened and will continue to happen in this space. But, you know, it's awesome to see that you and Deposco and what you guys are doing to help your customers to adapt to these changes. So, so really appreciate the great insight. So got a few questions. If you don't mind, I think we've got some time probably to get through all of them, and then we'll go ahead and close out. So the first question is, with increasing complexity kind of fulfillment networks, how important is real-time visibility in improving order orchestration, and what should companies prioritize first?
So it kind of is a chicken and the egg problem. You know, I think they're both a little bit important, how you deploy the technology, how you deploy the rules. But I've always been of the belief that technology just makes a process go faster, good or bad. So going back to fundamentals and thinking about what business you're in, what should those rules look like, what parts of inventory should be segmented into different channels, and really taking a full 360 view is where you would start. So let's look at, you said traditional retail. What do I want to restrict for the store? What do I want to offer online? What do I want to offer as ship online from store? So there's all of these different combinations that before you apply any rules-based, before you apply any technology, understand what your business you want to be in. And does it make any sense too? We see a lot of companies that will skip past the self-identity phase and go into the improvement phase and go, yep, we're just going to turn everything on. Let's do some Amazon. Let's do some dropship. Let's do this. And what turns out happening is either A, some part of that ecosystem wasn't structured to be able to handle it, or your customers ultimately didn't want it. So being able to really look at what business you're in versus where you want to be, and then how do you apply technology as the driver to get there. It's better to think about it as an enablement or a solution to a problem. But if there isn't a problem to solve, the solution is actually going to get in the way. So start with understanding the business, then find the right partner to be able to enable that from a technological standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. So next one. There's a slide. The slide on validation and pre-processing suggests automation reduces friction. So what's your advice to companies who still rely on manual order reviews, and maybe what the risk is of still relying on that as well?
100%. I mean, ultimately, the friction is going to be in the ability of your people to execute. If you have a very simple process, you have a very small pool of SKUs within the warehouse, and it just processes the same way every time, there's not going to be a lot of value to order management. But as you start increasing catalog complexity, as you start improving increasing channel complexity, both from an inbound as well as an outbound side, and then leaving humans as the bottleneck, you are trusting that every person in every shift, every managerial role, every processor role is going to have a perfect set of information, that they're going to be able to handle every order the exact same way every time. They're going to know what every flag is, what every nuance is, what every exception is, and it's simply unreasonable. And so the friction is going to be the cost of time added in a person manually looking at an order, applying their imperfect knowledge of the organization. And I'm not saying that in a derogative way. Everyone has imperfect knowledge. And then expecting a consistent result every time. It's the same warning you give with a lot of AI right now of expect different results every single time, expect different outcomes, nothing's consistent. It's the same way when humans process information. So one person may look at an order and say, well, that's going to Colorado and it's going to handle from DC1. And then somebody else is going to look at it and go, nope, it's coming out of DC2 over in Florida. So depending on how you've got everything structured and the complexity of it, that's going to make that friction worse. And so when you look at it from a manual order process, you're going to have to, if you can't put the technology behind it, you're going to have to make your rules much simpler and easy to apply. If the decision tree is simple, you've got a process. But if it becomes overly complex, you're either going to lose margin, you're going to lose SLA, or you're ultimately going to lose customers because now you do not have consistency in execution. So trying to focus, if you can't apply a technology solution, which is obviously what I'm recommending, if you have to do it from a manual standpoint, it has to be simplistic enough that every single shift and every person on it can execute it the same way every time, because that's what the customer cares about. They don't care about how much friction you have in your operation. They care about how it shows up on their doorstep.
Okay, makes perfect sense. All right, I think we have time for one more. So how should companies measure whether their OMS is truly customer-centric? So what are some of the KPIs or feedback mechanisms that matter most when evaluating that?
And that one's going to be a little bit of everything. So I can go through some that are really key to me for how order management processes work versus what may be key for somebody else. This is going to have that grain of salt of business to business. But for me personally, it's going to be the processing time between the order entering the system, order hitting the order management, and then ending up in one of your distribution centers for a pick weigh process. So I want to see that order to pick time so that I can understand how much time, both how well was my process working before, as well as how well is my process working after. And then you're going to want to do, in more advanced situations, a little bit of simulation work to say, here's a set of orders that I used before. What is that as a benchmark versus how my orders would be processed with my current rules? And looking at what is my savings per package? What is my savings both from a monetary as well as a time perspective during packages? Do I see reductions in multi-package shipments? Do I see reduction in time to serve? So really looking at those speed and accuracy of how is it flowing through the system? How well is it flowing through the system? Are my picks above 99%? Is my inventory accuracy above 99%? Do I see that my order accuracy is up? You know, one of the benefits I should see is that reduction in post-process pain we talked about earlier. Am I fielding more call center calls? Am I fielding less call center calls? All of that can be secondary knock-on effects to say the customer's being served. If they are lifetime value is a great one. If I think about this from a marketing perspective, do I see my customers coming back and spending more over time in an account by account basis? That's a prime indicator that I'm doing what my customers want and lowering the cost to acquire new customers.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So again, Joe, really appreciate it. I mean, it's clear you're a subject matter expert and thought leader in this space. And so I really appreciate you jumping on and, presenting in Cartonize. So for all those that are participated, thank you for participating in Cartonize and joining the session with Joe. If you'd like to go to the next session, remember there's a link on the far right of the console that will take you there directly. So again, appreciate everybody joining and have a great day. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Tom.